There's nothing incoming. No alerts, no movement. Just a calm military sci-fi narrative starting now, paced for rest. The sea on that planet never looked like water. It looked like a thin skin stretched over something heavier and meaner underneath. It reflected nothing cleanly. Every wave carried oil-sheen colors that didn't belong in nature, and the rain fell with a bite that turned exposed metal dull in minutes. You learned to keep your mouth closed. You learned to swallow your own spit and not the air. We staged in the shadow of a dead platform, a broad steel plate supported by pylons that had been chewed through by years of salt and artillery. Above us, clouds hung low enough that the orbital glow was smothered into a constant bruise. Somewhere beyond the storm curtain, the coastal guns kept firing. They were shielded, fed from the intake complex we were going for. That was the math. Shut the intake, starve the shield, and the next wave could land something heavier than bodies. Second wave. Breachers. The people who go in after the first wave has already bled the surf into foam and marked the shoreline with flares that don't stay lit. My suit was old enough that it sounded like it had opinions. Every time I moved my shoulder, the left joint rasped. The seal at my right wrist had been patched twice with field polymer and prayer. Salt got into everything. It got into the skin, the threads, the thoughts. It made you itch under armor until you wanted to peel yourself open. We waited with our backs to wet steel, knees in shallow pooling water, tools clinking softly when someone shifted. No one spoke. We didn't do words on approaches. Words made promises, and promises were something you couldn't keep in that war. The liaison stood apart, where the deck slanted down into open black. He was tall, but not in the way humans were tall. His height came from length, from spare geometry and jointed grace. His suit was allied pattern, matte and clean, with a collar ridge that protected the back of the skull. That ridge mattered more than armor plates in my head. I hated that ridge. I hated what it implied. His species had learned a trick early: how to talk without sound, how to press a suggestion into a mind that was already tired. They called it guidance. They called it alignment. We called it collapse, after the first time it swept through a line company and left men alive but unusable. Blank faces, hands that wouldn't stop shaking, rifles held like foreign objects. Some recovered, some didn't. One of ours didn't. You can survive a lot if the enemy leaves bruises you can measure. It's harder when the damage looks like nothing. We had been told this liaison wasn't one of the handlers, that he was an operations attachment, a bridge between commands that couldn't agree on maps and supply rates. We had been told he had no authority over us. We had been told his presence was political. We had been told a lot of things in that campaign, and most of them were designed to keep us walking. I watched him through the rain, the way you watch an unstable support beam. Not fear exactly, something flatter. A need to know where it is at all times. A green light blinked twice on the squad lead's forearm. It was the only communication that worked reliably anymore, line-of-sight codes and hardwired pulses. Magnetic haze from the enemy's coastal generators ate our radios and made the world feel slightly out of phase. You could scream into a mic and hear only your own breathing and the wet click of your tongue. We moved. The descent from the platform was a ladder of corroded rungs into darkness. My boots hit the water with a sound that wasn't a splash so much as a thick slap. The sea accepted us without complaint. That should have been a warning. Amphib suits keep you alive by lying. They tell you you're afloat. They tell you the water is only a medium. Underneath, the weight is still there. The drag is still there. The cold is still there, waiting at every joint seal, looking for a weakness. We slid forward in a staggered file, half walking, half swimming, weapons held up and angled down, barrels tracking the surface where drones would skim. The rain made a constant hiss on my visor. Each exhale fogged the edge of my view. The taste of the filter was metallic, like sucking on coins. Ahead, the first wave's markers were dim pinpricks, chemical floats that pulsed once every few seconds. You didn't want steady light. Steady light invited attention. The enemy liked attention. It was built for it. 100 meters out, the surf changed texture. The foam thickened and moved wrong, like it had its own intent. Biomines. The enemy bred them in warm tanks and released them at night. They hunted heat in motion. They didn't explode with fire. They chewed. They latched and bored through seals with ceramic teeth, and then you drowned in your own suit. We saw one on the surface, a pale shape rolling in the black water, almost pretty in a sick way. Someone flicked a jammer puck into the surf. It hit with a soft plop, sank, and emitted a pulse you couldn't hear but could feel in your motors. The pale shape twitched, lost interest, drifted away. The first drone came without sound. It broke the surface like a blade, a low-profile skimmer with a sensor mast and twin micro-turrets. Its body shed water like oil. It was close enough that I saw the rivulets bead and run off it in patterns that looked intentional. The squad-lead's hand snapped up, 2 fingers, then a closed fist. Freeze. The line obeyed. Movement made you reel. The drone's mast rotated, slow and searching. It wasn't looking for us as shapes. It was looking for differences, heat, wake disturbance, the microbubbles from suit vents. We held breath. We let the water press against our armor and pretended we were part of the sea. It drifted past. And then the storm flashed, a white rip-through cloud, and for half a second the world lit up like an interrogation room. The drone's sensors spiked. Its turret swung. The first rounds hit the water in front of us and turned foam into steam. Cutting rounds. The kind that didn't just pierce, they carried an embedded plasma filament that ate through material after impact. You could hear the hiss as the water flashed and the air filled with the smell of cooked salt. We moved because staying still was now a decision to die in place. I fired without thinking, rail pulses thudding through my shoulder in a way that made my teeth bite down hard. The rounds traveled clean, invisible, until they hit the drone's mast and tore it off in a spray of hot shards. The drone kept moving, blind but still lethal, turrets tracking motion now, dumb and fast. A man to my left went under, not shot, pulled. The foam around him bulged and something latched. His arms flailed once. Then his suit's buoyancy failed as the seal at his hip tore open. He sank like a dropped tool. We didn't stop. You don't stop in the surf. Stopping is how you make a memorial. The shoreline wasn't sand. It was a seawall made of stacked composite blocks, each one the size of a transport, slotted and mortared into place with industrial precision. The intake complex sat behind it, buried in the bulk of the archipelago's infrastructure. Water went in. Power came out. Guns stayed alive. We reached the wall at an angle, bodies pressing into wet stone. Above, the first wave had carved a narrow breach point with microcharges, just wide enough for a suit to squeeze through if it turned sideways. The edges of the breach were blackened and still steaming. We flowed into it like a wound closing. Inside, the air changed. The rain noise dropped away, replaced by a constant low roar, water moving through ducts and turbines somewhere deeper. The walls were slick with condensation. Pipes ran overhead like ribs. Warning lights blinked red and amber in patterns that meant nothing to me and everything to whoever had built the place. The magnetic haze was worse inside. My HUD flickered. The compass spun. The radio remained dead. We switched to hardline thin tether cables that we clipped to the man ahead. Old method. Physical connection. The kind you could feel. The liaison clipped in last. I watched his hands. They were gloved, but the motions were too smooth, too practiced, like he didn't need to think about the tool to use it. That bothered me more than if he'd been clumsy. Competence from him felt like a weapon. We moved down a service corridor that sloped toward the intake. Water ran along the floor in shallow sheets, carrying grit. The smell was industrial rot lubricants, algae, old heat. At the first junction, a sign panel hung crooked. The lettering was enemy script, angular and tight. Under it, someone had painted over a symbol with allied dye, the mark of the first wave's path. Follow the mark, find the valves, close them. Blow the intake filters if you have to. Deprive the shield. That was the plan. Plans are soft things in war. They tear easily. The enemy had left behind something worse than mines in the corridors. They left denial architecture, doors designed to seal and flood sections of the facility to drown intruders in controlled compartments. It was elegant. It was cheap. It worked. At the second junction, the floor plates dipped. A pressure line, a sensor. I saw it half a second before the man in front stepped on it. The world snapped tight. Steel shutters slammed down behind us with a sound like a coffin lid. Ahead, another shutter dropped. We were in a box. Then the water rose. Not from the corridor floor like a slow leak. From vents in the walls, sudden and violent. The intake pumps reversed and pushed C into the compartment at pressure, turning the corridor into a filling lung. I reached for the manual override panel by instinct. My hands found only slick metal and a broken keypad. Someone had smashed it earlier, maybe first wave, maybe enemy. It didn't matter. The panel was dead. The water hit my thighs, my waist, my chest. It was cold enough that it stabbed through suit insulation. It carried grit that scraped against my armor. It smelled like the sea outside, oil and metal and something faintly organic. We braced. We tried to climb the walls. There was nowhere to go. The compartment was built for this. It had smooth surfaces, no handholds, only maintenance grates high up that were already sealed. The hard-line tether between us went taut, then slack as someone lost footing. Underwater, noise changes. It becomes internal. You hear your own heartbeat in your skull. You hear your breath regulator clicking. You hear the faint grinding of armor plates as bodies press and slide. The first man to panic burned his oxygen fast. His regulator started to wheeze, trying to keep up. He thrashed, kicked, slammed into me. His visor was wide with reflected emergency lights. I grabbed his harness and held him against the wall to stop him from spinning. It wasn't kindness. It was control. A drowning man will take you with him without intending to. My suit alarm started to light up. Microleak detected. Pressure differential. Corrosion rate elevated. The sea here wasn't just water, it was chemical. We had minutes before seals failed. The squad lead pulsed a code on his forearm. Rapid, urgent. We needed an exit. We needed to cut through something anywhere. This was my job. Breach. I pulled a microcharge from my chest rig. The casing was rubberized. The polymer felt too smooth in wet gloves. I pressed it to the shutter seam at the far end, where the metal met the frame. I tried to set the adhesive. It didn't take. Water pressure peeled it away like a leaf. I tried again with the backup strip. Same result. The shutter was being pushed from the other side by water as well, equalizing pressure. The seam was tight. The adhesive had nothing to bite. I was burning time, and time was oxygen. The liaison moved. He didn't signal. He didn't gesture. He simply pushed through the swirl of bodies in the rising water and came to the shutter with me. He took a line thrower from his own rig and clipped it to the frame with a clamp that bit into metal. Then he ran the line across the seam, cinched it hard, creating a physical anchor where adhesive failed. It was practical. It was obvious. It was something I should have done. I felt a clean, cold irritation at myself and an uglier one at him for being right. I set the charge again, this time pressing it into the tensioned line. The adhesive held because the line held it. The charge light blinked ready. We backed away, braced, and I triggered it with a wired pulse. Underwater detonations don't throw flame, they throw force. The compartment shuddered. The shutter seam bulged. A crack opened, thin as a knife, and then widened. Water surged through, equalizing. The shutter didn't open fully. It didn't need to. We needed a gap. We squeezed one by one through the torn seam, armor scraping, cables snagging. A man behind me got stuck at the hip where his suit plating caught on jagged metal. He twisted wrong. The plate tore. Water punched into the gap and his suit alarm screamed. We pulled him through anyway. You can't fix everything. You can only keep moving. On the other side, the corridor dropped into an intake conduit wide, circular, built to move water in volumes. The walls were coated with a slick biofilm that glistened under red lights. The roar was louder here. The facility's heart was close. The first wave's dye marks were smeared by water, but still visible in streaks along the wall, pointing toward the valve banks that controlled flow. We followed. We lost another man to a biomine that had been released into the conduit. It wasn't meant for this environment, but it adapted. It latched onto his calf seal and chewed. He kicked it free too late. The seal gave, and the conduit water took him, rolling him down the slope like debris. We watched his suit light fade in the churn. The liaison didn't look away. Neither did I. Looking away doesn't make it less true. We reached the valve chamber, an industrial cathedral of pipes and wheels, everything oversized and built to be turned by machines or desperate humans. The valves were on a raised platform, accessible by a grated staircase that was already half submerged. The chamber had a ceiling lost in steam. Condensation fell like warm rain inside the cold. The valve wheels were locked with enemy security collars. That meant we couldn't just turn them. We had to cut. We had to break. I climbed the staircase with my knee complaining and my suit seals itching. Each step rang hollow. The chamber amplified sound. I hated that. Sound was a beacon. At the platform, I pulled a cutting tool and set it to plasma filament. The arc hissed as it bit into the collar. Sparks fizzed into the damp air. The smell of burned metal was sharp and familiar, like the inside of an ammo crate after a firefight. Behind me, the squad spread out, covering angles, watching the conduit entrances. We had no comms. We used hand signals in proximity. Old war. The liaison stood at the far end of the platform, watching the intake conduit's mouth like he expected it to spit teeth. I cut through the first collar. It fell away, clanged on the grate, and disappeared into the water below. I put both hands on the wheel and turned. It resisted like it wanted to stay open. Then it moved, slow, and the vibration ran up my arms. Somewhere deep, a pump note changed. The roar shifted. One valve down. The second collar was thicker. The enemy had learned. I cut anyway, tool whining, filament chewing. That was when the counterflood hit again. Not in our chamber. In the conduit behind us. The intake system reversed in a different section, forcing water through side channels designed to push intruders back toward the sea. It was a hydraulic broom. The conduit mouth behind the platform belched water and debris. Something solid hit the platform supports with a dull bang. The grate shook under my boots. The squad lead signaled tight fist, then 2 fingers down. Brace. Incoming. The first defense drones came through the conduit like fish made of metal. They didn't fly. They swam, propelled by ducted impellers, turrets mounted low to keep stable in turbulence. They used the water to hide their approach. They rose at the edge of the platform and fired up through the grate. Cutting rounds turned the air above the water into a web of hissing lines. One of our men took a hit through the thigh joint. The round didn't explode. It drilled, then the filament ate. The joint seal failed in a second. Blood clouded inside his suit in a dark bloom. He fell, clutching at the wound like he could hold the seal shut by force. He didn't scream. We don't scream in stories like this. Or maybe we do, and later we forget it because it sounds weak in memory. I only remember the wet rasp of his breathing and the way his fingers kept slipping on his own suit plating. We returned fire down through the grate, rail pulses hammering the water. The drones jerked, sparks bursting where rounds hit. One died and sank. Another kept coming, turret tracking. I kept cutting the collar because stopping meant the valve stayed open and the guns stayed alive. That was the mission. A cutting round hit the tool. It blew the filament arc sideways. The tool casing cracked, and a shower of sparks sprayed my glove. I felt heat through the insulation. My hand jerked back. The collar remained half cut, still holding. I looked down through the grate and saw more movement in the water-pale rolling shapes. Bile mines. The enemy had released them into the valve chamber now that it was flooded enough to carry them. They hunted heat. Our suits were heat. The squad's formation tightened. Tight formations in a chamber like that are death. Loose formations are also death. War is like that. You pick the shape of your dying. The liaison moved again. He went down the staircase into the water without hesitation, stepping off the last rung into the churn, letting it take him up to the chest. He clipped a hardline spool to the platform support and fed the cable out, running it toward the conduit mouth. He was trying to create a stable line in the turbulence, something the drones couldn't easily jam, something we could use if we had to retreat or if someone got pulled. It was practical. It was also suicidal. The water near the conduit mouth was where the drones and biomines concentrated. That was the throat of the system. That was where pressure could pin you against metal until your ribs cracked inside your suit. He went anyway. A biomine rolled toward him, pale and hungry. He struck it with the butt of his weapon hard, and it bounced away, teeth scraping on armor. Another came. He kicked it down, but it lashed briefly, chewing at a seam. I saw his suit alarm flare, amber seal integrity drop, then stabilize as he slapped a patch strip over the bite. He kept feeding the line. A drone turret swung toward him and fired. Cutting rounds stitched the water around his torso, flashing steam. He ducked, used the conduit lip as cover, and shoved the hardline clamp into a maintenance ring. The clamp bit. The line went taut. Then the conduit belched again, a surge of water that slammed him sideways. He hit the wall hard enough that his helmet rang. He didn't bounce. He stuck, pinned by pressure, one arm trapped between his body and steel. He was in the worst possible place, alive, pinned, and visible to machines. I saw a drone rise near him, turret angling for the collar ridge of his helmet, the one that protected his skull. That ridge would protect from fragments, not from a cutting filament. A filament would find the seam and open it. The squad lead raised his weapon, but the angle was wrong. Shooting at the drone risked hitting the liaison. Not because we cared about him as a person, because the hard line he'd anchored was now our only clean path if the chamber became fully untenable. Because he was physically holding part of our survival. I fired anyway. My rail round hit the drone's turret assembly and tore it off. The drone jerked, spun, and sank. Its remaining drive tried to compensate and drove it into the conduit wall, where it wedged and kept spinning uselessly, impeller whining. The liaison was still pinned. Water pressure held him like a hand. He used his free hand to pull something from his rig. Another clamp, a second anchor point. He clipped it above his head, creating redundancy. Then he released the first clamp and let himself be carried a meter down and away, using the line tension to swing free rather than fight the water directly. It was controlled. It was trained. I hated that my mind, uninvited, labeled it as brave. I didn't want bravery from him. I wanted distance. Above, my half-cut collar still waited. I grabbed the damaged cutting tool and forced it back into operation. The casing sparked. The filament arc stuttered. I held it steady with both hands and finished the cut. The collar dropped. The valve wheel was free. I turned it until my shoulders burned. The wheel fought. The system did not want to be shut. It was designed to keep moving until something physically stopped it. I stopped it. The pump note changed again, deeper this time. The roar softened by a fraction. The water level in the chamber steadied. The conduit surge weakened. The enemy counterflood system was losing its feed. One more valve remained, the primary intake, the one that mattered most. Its collar was not just thick, it was armored. It had a sensor tag and a lock that likely reported to the defense network. Cutting it would trigger something. Not cutting it would leave the shield fed. We didn't have time to debate. Debate requires energy. I moved to it, tool in hand, knowing the filament might fail mid-cut. I started anyway. As soon as the arc bit, the chamber lights shifted from red to white. Emergency illumination. A sign that the facility had detected sabotage at a critical node. The defense system would respond with something heavier than drones. The water below the grate churned. More movement. Not drones. Bigger. Something struck the platform supports from below with a force that shuddered through my boots. The grate flexed. Bolts creaked. Ferrobile mines don't hit like that. That was a hunter organism. An engineered thing the enemy used in flooded structures to tear intruders apart without spending munitions. It didn't need to be intelligent. It needed to be strong and persistent. It rose under the grate, a pale mass with jointed limbs and a jaw ring that opened like a flower. Its teeth were ceramic and wet. It snapped at the grate, testing, then bit and pulled. The grate bowed. The squad fired down. Rail rounds punched into its body, tearing chunks that floated away like meat in water. It didn't stop. It pulled again. The grate screamed. The collar under my cutting tool was half cut. I kept going because stopping meant starting over. The tool stuttered. The filament weakened. Sparks danced across my glove. The creature tore a section of grate free. A man's boot slipped through the gap. The creature snapped and took the boot, then the lower leg with it as if it were soft. The suit seal failed instantly. Blood clouded. The man's body jerked once, then went slack as the water pressure and shock stole the fight. We didn't pull him back. There was nothing to pull that would help. The liaison was back at the platform stairs, water streaming off his armor. He climbed fast, using the hardline as a guide, dragging his own oxygen pack behind him like a wounded limb. His suit alarms flashed amber. Seal damage. He was losing integrity. He reached the platform and didn't look at us for approval. He moved to the primary valve. He didn't try to take my tool. He took a different approach. He pulled a compact-shaped charge from his rig and slapped it onto the collar's seam, right where my filament had weakened the metal. He then clipped the hard line to the valve wheel spoke, creating a tether that would keep the wheel from twisting away when the blast hit. He looked at me once, visor reflecting white emergency lights. There was no expression I could read. His face wasn't built for my instincts. In that moment, I didn't feel hatred. I felt a blank clarity. He was doing the thing that kept us from dying here. He triggered the charge. The blast was tight and brutal, designed to cut metal without turning the chamber into shrapnel hell. The collar split clean. The valve wheel lurched against the tether, held. I grabbed it and turned. The creature below hit the platform supports again, harder, as if it sensed the system changing and wanted to stop it. The platform shook. Bolts sheared. The chamber groaned. I turned until my shoulders screamed. The wheel resisted, then gave. The pump note dropped. The roar of the intake softened into something like a wounded animal trying to breathe. The water level began to fall, not quickly, but enough that the creature below lost buoyancy. It thrashed, jaws snapping at air and water. The squad fired until it stopped moving, its pale mass settling into the lower chamber like dumped cargo. For a few seconds, there was only steam and dripping and the wheeze of suit breathers. Then the facility shuddered, a deep vibration that came up through the pipes. The coastal guns above, deprived of shield feed, began to take hits from orbit. We couldn't see it, but we felt it in the structure, impacts distant but heavy, like a giant knocking on a door. Mission success is not a feeling, it's an absence of immediate failure. We didn't cheer, we didn't even look at each other much. We checked seals, we counted oxygen, we inventoried who was still upright. The liaison's suit alarm kept flashing. He'd been bitten by a bile mine earlier. The patch strip held, but corrosion had started under it. His wrist seals were white with saltburn. He moved like someone who could feel fluid where it shouldn't be. The squad lead pulsed extraction code on his forearm. 3 slow blinks. The window was open. We had a corridor now. We had to move to the seawall breach and signal the landers. We descended the platform stairs into lowering water, stepping over bodies that had wedged against grates. One faceplate was cracked, water inside, eyes open and fixed. The dead looked surprised sometimes. That surprises the living. In the conduit corridor, the magnetic haze was still thick, but the facility's defense activity had shifted. The automated network was reacting to orbital impacts. Drones were redeploying. Bile mines drifted without clear direction, confused by changing flow and heat patterns. We moved fast but not frantic. Frantic burns oxygen and makes mistakes. Mistakes are expensive. At the flooded compartment where the shutters had trapped us earlier, the hardline anchors the liaison had placed were still there. The line was taut across a seam, a physical memory of his decisions. We used it without comment. On the way back, a drone caught us in a junction and fired. Cutting rounds took chunks out of the wall and sprayed molten composite. A man behind me took a round through the shoulder joint. The filament ate. His arm went limp at a wrong angle, suit seal hissing. He didn't fall. He kept moving, dragging the dead weight as if it were someone else's problem. We reached the seawall breach and felt the storm air again, colder, cleaner in a way that still tasted like metal. The sea outside was rougher now. Orbital impacts had agitated the water. Waves slapped the wall with force that made the blocks vibrate. Extraction markers flashed on the horizon. Low craft skimming in under radar, guided by the corridor we'd opened. Their engines made no comforting sound, only a distant thrum like a headache. We signaled with chemical flare because radios were still dead. The flare burned green in the rain, stubborn and ugly. The craft angled toward us. We waded back into the surf, bodies heavy, suits leaking. The sea tried to pull us down as it always did. It didn't care about our mission success. It didn't care about politics and alliances and blame. It only cared about weight and weakness. Halfway out, the liaison stumbled. It wasn't dramatic. He simply lost a step. His right leg joint seized briefly, corrosion in the actuator, then released with a jerk that threw him off balance. He went down into the water, helmet submerged, bubbles streaming from a seal. I reached him because he was close and because my hands were already out. I grabbed his harness and pulled. His suit was heavier than mine, denser plating. The water dragged at both of us. He regained footing, but his wrist seal was worse now. A thin stream of darker water leaked into his glove. His suit alarms flashed red for a second, then amber. He was degrading. We got him to the craft's side ramp with the rest of us. Hands reached out, grabbed armor plates, hauled bodies up like equipment. The craft interior smelled like heated polymer and antiseptic. It was bright enough to hurt. Inside, we collapsed into seats that were basically straps and metal frames. The craft lifted, water sloughing off its hull, and banked away from the seawall. Through the rear aperture, I saw the archipelago's industrial silhouette shudder under distant impacts, steam plumes rising where structures broke. The liaison sat across from me, head slightly bowed as if listening to internal alarms. His glove was swelling with trapped fluid. The patch strips on his thigh and torso were peeling at the edges. Corrosion foam had been applied in the field, but it was only a delay. We made it back to the staging platform, and med crews met us with lights and hooks and practiced hands. They pulled the wounded first. They pulled the dying next. They pulled the rest of us last, because last can wait. I watched the liaison get unsealed. When Allied med techs opened his wrist seal, the water that poured out was black and smelled faintly sweet, like spoiled coolant. His skin beneath was mottled, not with blood but with chemical burn. He didn't react. If he felt pain, he kept it behind whatever architecture his species used for privacy. They carried him away. We were debriefed in a room that vibrated with distant bombardment. The air was dry and smelled like recycled breath. A recorder light blinked at me. I spoke into it because that is what you do. You turn what happened into data. I reported valves closed, corridor opened, coastal shield feed disrupted, enemy defense response observed, casualties, equipment failures, hardline anchors effective, liaison actions noted. Not praised, not condemned, not decorated, not forgiven, just noted. Later, in the medbay, I saw one of my squad sitting with his helmet in his lap, staring at the floor. He had been the one closest to the old neural collapse incident years ago. He had been the one who carried the damaged man out back then until his arms failed. He had been the one whose eyes never looked steady again after. He did not look at the liaison's empty bed across the bay. He did not ask if the liaison lived. He did not ask anything. Some debts in war are paid in blood and still remain unpaid. The corridor we opened held for 2 days. Heavy landers came in. Artillery rolled through. The coastal guns fell silent. The campaign line moved forward by a few kilometers of dead infrastructure and poisoned water. No one marked the intake chamber as a place of significance. It was just another room on a map, another coordinate in an operations report. The dead there would be listed as missing, then presumed, then archived. I remember it differently. I remember the feel of the valve wheel under wet gloves, the metal vibrating as it resisted shutting. I remember the sound the grate made when it bowed under the creature's pull. I remember the hardline cable cutting into my palm as I used it to steady myself in rising water. And I remember, with a clarity that has nothing to do with forgiveness, the liaison stepping into the worst water without a word, because words wouldn't have helped, and because he didn't have the luxury of being hated and cautious at the same time. The last image I keep is small. On the platform's support near the valve chamber stairs, where condensation ran in steady lines, there were handprints, salt-stained glove marks left where someone had braced in the surge. They were smeared and partial, not a signature, not a message. Just proof that a body had been there, holding against pressure. The sea kept taking after we left. It always does. The end. The story powers down like systems entering a night cycle, one light at a time. Let your thoughts do the same. Rest.